I certainly think that in some cases, it would be best for the Vatican to stick to matters of morality, to stick to matters of what's going on in the Catholic Church.
This is unprecedented. It's unprecedented for an American vice president to come the week before an election. The reason why we're doing it is because we thought there was so much garbage happening against Victor in this election that we had to show that there are actually a lot of people and a lot of friends across the world who recognize that Victor and his government are doing a good job and they're important partners for peace.
Well, Vice President J.D. Vance has basically ordered the Pope Leo, to stay out of US politics and focus on questions of morality. Well, he spent some time in Hungary trying to get Viktor Orban reelected, and oops. He gone. But that's not what this story is about. This story is actually about the fact that J.D. Vance, who claims to be a devout Catholic, turned on Catholics and Catholicism and instead decided to side with the unhinged president of the United States, Donald Trump, who took time out of his day to attack Pope Leo because he doesn't like Pope Leo's commentary and stances on the brutalization and murder of innocent civilians in the Middle East. So let's get into the details here. So as a reminder, Trump attacked Pope Leo in a lengthy Truth Social post, writing that Pope Leo is weak on crime and terrible for foreign policy. I don't want a pope who thinks it's okay for Iran to have a nuclear weapon. The Pope has never said that he's okay with Iran having a nuclear weapon. It's just, okay. Like the false binary thing here, right? Where it's like, oh, you're against the war. That must mean you want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. No one said that. The straw man here is ridiculous, but I'll continue with the statement. He also said, I don't want a pope who thinks it's terrible that America attacked Venezuela. Well, I do actually. I do want that kind of pope. Because honestly, what is morality if the pope is advocating for the kidnapping of foreign leaders because you don't like them? Okay, but I'll continue. And I don't want a pope who criticizes the president of the United States because I'm doing exactly what I was elected in a landslide to do, setting record low numbers in crime and creating the greatest stock market in history. Again, none of that. I mean, the stock market's doing fine, but the stock market is built on a house of cards, which is terrifying considering the fact that hardworking Americans have their retirement accounts invested in that garbage. But here's what happened next. So this is all because Pope Leo had criticized Trump most of the time without even naming Trump, by the way. That's how sensitive Trump is, because he's someone who's calling for peace. That's what the Pope should do, right? He doesn't want bloodshed in an unjust war. Take a look.
Once again, what I said in the Urbi et Orbi message on Sunday, asking all people of goodwill to search always for peace and not violence, to reject war, especially a war which many people have said is an unjust war, which is continuing to escalate and which is not resolving anything. In fact, we have a worldwide economic crisis, energy crisis, situation in the Middle East of great instability, which is only provoking more hatred throughout the world. So come back to the table. Let's talk. Let's look for solutions in a peaceful way. And let's remember, especially the innocent, children, the elderly, the sick, so many people who have already become or will become victims of this continued warfare. People want peace. I would invite the citizens of all the countries involved to contact the authorities, political leaders, congressmen, to ask them, tell them to work for peace and to reject war always.
J.D. Vance said he wants the Pope to focus on questions of morality. Did the Pope not just address morality? I mean, he just talked about the necessity of peace, the protection of human lives. In fact, if you are triggered by what you just heard from Pope Leo, maybe it's time to consider you're the bad guy. Maybe you're the bad guy. If you're triggered by the Pope calling for peace, an end to war, an end to violence, you are the bad guy. Just to be clear. which takes us back to Vice President JD Vance. So he did not in any way try to push back against the president, either privately or publicly, of course. Now, there's a subtle way you can do it without triggering Trump because he is very thin-skinned and egotistical. I get that. But this is a guy who wants to run for president in 2028. What are you doing? What are you doing? Okay. So instead of doing the right thing as someone who purports to be a Catholic, he decided to tell the Pope to back off. Take a look.
Do you think that when the president says it's hurting him very badly, catering to the radical left is hurting the Catholic Church? Do you agree with the president there?
Well, look, I think the president has the prerogative to set American foreign policy. He's got the prerogative to set American immigration policy. He has to look out for the interests of the United States of America. And that inevitably means that when the Vatican comments on issues of public policy, sometimes there's going to be agreement, of course, and sometimes there's going to be disagreement. I think that's a reasonable thing, Brett. Again, I don't think that it's particularly newsworthy, but I certainly think that in some cases, it would be best for the Vatican to stick to matters of morality, to stick to matters of what's going on in the Catholic Church, and let the President of the United States stick to dictating American public policy. But when they're in conflict, they're in conflict. I don't worry about it too much, Brett. I think it's a natural thing. I'm sure it'll happen in the future, and it's not that big of a deal that it happened in the past.
Total clown. No backbone at all. At all. Let me remind you that Pope Leo happens to be the first US-born Pope. And as an American especially, he has the right to speak on the decisions made by the American government. And more importantly, regardless of where he was born or what his citizenship status is, what matters the most is the fact that he is the Pope. And the Pope should not be preaching violence. In fact, I agree with JD Vance. The Pope should be addressing issues of morality. So let's talk about this issue, which I believe is an issue of morality. Why? Well, according to US-based human rights group, this is the same human rights group that has been methodically tracking how many protesters were killed in Iran. And no, it wasn't 35,000. They're attaching names, the actual people who have been killed, and it's somewhere in the 6,000 range. But nonetheless, HRANA, Harana, I believe it's called, found that 3,636 people have been killed in Iran since this war began. 1,701 were innocent civilians, including 254 children, because of course. I mean, 168 of those children were killed in the opening salvo when the US decided to use Tomahawk missiles to bomb an elementary school in Manab. So how is that not a question of immorality that should be addressed, especially by a religious leader who people have faith in, who people trust, and who people listen to? You know, someone like Pope Leo. I'm not even a Catholic. It is insane that non-Catholics are defending the Pope harder than JD Vance has ever done, honestly. But let me continue. In the same interview, he told the Pope to stay out of foreign affairs. In the same interview where he told the Pope to stay out of foreign affairs, he also said this in regard to the peace talks that have been kind of taking place between the US and Iran. Take a look.
Made clear where we're willing, again, to be accommodating, and we've made clear where we absolutely need to see the nuclear material come out of the country of Iran. We actually made very clear what our red lines were. We also made clear, Brett, that we actually would be very happy. The President of the United States has said he would be very happy if Iran was treated like a normal country, if it had a normal economy, if its people were able to prosper and thrive. But in order for Iran to be a normal country economically, it's going to have to be a normal country from the perspective of not pursuing a nuclear weapon, and it's going to have to be a normal country from not pursuing terrorism. And so there really is, I think, a grand deal to be had here, but it's up to the Iranians, I think, to take the next step.
Let's identify which countries or which country in the region Donald Trump and JD Vance consider to be normal. Obviously, I'm talking about Israel, whose wars we're forced to bankroll and sacrifice our soldiers in. That's a normal country. So, okay, let's see Iran start behaving like Israel, since Israel is a normal country. If Iran just begins leveling the whole of Israel the way Israel leveled Gaza, that's normal, right? They can do that. Why shouldn't Iran be able to obtain nuclear weapons, considering the fact that the normal country in the region, Israel, has a nuclear arsenal and is not part of the non-proliferation treaty as every other nuclear power is? So maybe the big problem here is that we're not letting Iran have a nuclear weapon. Let's let them have a nuclear weapon so they can be a normal country. Maybe Iran should seek to expand its borders and annex land from its neighbors like Israel does. Maybe that'll make them a normal country. Vance is not a man who is guided by principles. Vance is not a man who is of conviction, who's willing to fight for his core values, because he has none. JD Vance was grown in a petri dish by Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel's, the company he co-founded, Palantir, is profitable specifically because it is now one of the major defense contractors that profits off war. JD Vance, like every other corrupt politician, is beholden to his donors. The idea that this man is some peacenik, and by the way, this is my speculation, I want to be clear about that. I think it's JD Vance who leaked that story to the New York Times about what occurred in the Situation Room, where, it painted JD Vance as this like hero that's like trying to prevent the war from happening. He's pushing back. He's working overtime, leaking stories to Maggie Haberman, who dutifully does her stenographer work. Is like, oh, JD Vance was so great. He was pushing back so hard. No, he wasn't. JD Vance will go to war on behalf of Israel and he'll like it. That's who JD Vance really is. He was never a peacenik. There's never been a shred of evidence to indicate he's a peacenik. And he doesn't even have the courage to stand up to the president of the United States as the Pope is getting attacked by said president. So I don't trust anything coming out of JD Vance's mouth. So many people were like, oh, well, that JD Vance is going to be part of the negotiation. So maybe we'll get peace. As two Israeli assets were standing behind him, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. Please. I just don't want you guys to be hoodwinked by these scammers and these loathsome individuals who think you're dumb enough to buy their BS. I don't think you're dumb. I think you're way smarter than that. And in fact, despite how hard JD Vance has been working behind the scenes to paint himself as, the anti-war candidate for 2028, he was recently thanked by AIPAC. Fascinating. So AIPAC quote tweeted a post from JD Vance where he says, "We've made clear that we absolutely need to see the nuclear material come out of the country of Iran. The ball is in the Iranians' court because we put a lot on the table." Wow, great quote. AIPAC thanked him for that. Thank you, Vice President. Kiss of death. So maybe we shouldn't be meddling in other countries' affairs, right, JD Vance? Right? Since you think it's inappropriate for the Pope to comment on questions of war and peace. But I think the Pope speaking out on this makes him courageous. It makes him moral and beyond qualified for the job he's doing as the Pope. If I were Catholic, I would feel incredibly proud to be represented by Pope Leo. Because we don't have enough public figures who are willing to speak out against atrocities that are currently being committed in the Middle East for no reason other than greed and land expansion. So there you have it.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.